it a more powerful tool for negotiation.
I'm a firm believer creativity is a learned skill.
For interactive video, microlearning, or if they already have a vision in mind for the type of learner experience.
But what's the learning objective that you're trying to achieve?
Connecting product features with corresponding benefits.
Are you trying to get somebody to think differently? Are you trying to get somebody to perform a task better than they're doing it today?
Creative idea, right? And hey everybody, Erick Prospero here with the Microlearning Lab. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kevin Thorn, one of the leaders in the e-learning space. I'm a big fan of this guy. I think we connected, almost 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
And now I don't want to butcher your intro, so can you tell us a little more about yourself, your experience, and your expertise in this space and on the topic?
Oh, well, thanks, Eric. I don't know that I consider myself an expert. I just love this industry and I love what I do. If we just kind of go way back, I was a tactical trainer, ops trainer in the military. And not knowing training was going to be my future career, but it's just something that, there's some kind of satisfaction of teaching somebody something they don't know and then seeing the results of that. So when I left the military, training was not the first thing on my mind. Technology was, and I'm a big geek as well. So I went back to school and earned my IT degree, undergrad. That led me to a corporate office, and I worked in the IT department for a few years. And just like any other accidental instructional designer that we know, I happened to be teaching a class for call agents on a help desk about new technology that was being introduced in the company. The training manager of the company said, "Hey, you're pretty good at that teaching training thing. You should join our department." So there it is, right? You stand in front of a crowd and you're pretty good at presenting information and, oh, you're a trainer. I didn't put two and two together that I'd been doing it in the military as a career already, so I didn't know it was a thing, Anyway, jumped over to the training department, and that's when, this was pre-LMS days, and this was, training out of 3-ring binders, old school analog. Just started kicking around a vision. It's like, what would it look like if we converted everything to digital and put it on a website? That was the LMS vision in e-learning. So I cut my teeth in that company, learning everything I know today about e-learning and instructional design. And I was there about 15 years, and then I quit. And that's when I started my company, NuggetHead Studios, to be a boutique e-learning shop, custom. And then continue to learn, continue to teach, continue to learn, continue to pick up contracts, and being independent exposed me to a wider range of methods. Like healthcare is different than transportation, it's different than nonprofit, it's different than government. Training is still training, but the way you approach it in different industries is different. And therein lies how you creatively solve these problems in these different industries. So I just got more and more excited about the work I'm doing, and I kept going. And then I felt like something was missing. So I went back to school and earned my master's. And then after that, I was invited to teach at the university, which I'm an adjunct professor there. And then after that, the school said, "Hey, why don't you come back and earn your doctorate?" Got nothing else to do, why not? So I went back and earned my instructional design ED, educational doctorate. And that was a year and a half ago. No, last year, 23. Yeah, I graduated last year. So that's where it is. And then my research is all about using comics and visual language in e-learning, in training adults, not necessarily e-learning, but just leveraging the universal language of visuals to communicate messages more clearly. And that was what my research is, and that's what I continue to work now with, visual languages and comics and things like that. So that's my core.
And by the way, that's actually one of the first conversations we had at the conference we met at, right? I do recall you walking us through some of the examples, some of the illustrations, and following your content. And it's exciting to hear about your background with the your doctorate studies, because I wasn't aware of that. That's actually happened in between our first introduction. So a lot of this conversation is going to be tied to creativity in the e-learning space. And I'm excited about this piece of content because you could have the skill, right? You can have the artistic skill, you can have instructional design abilities, but if you lack the creative energy or tactfulness, you can see it in projects, right? They become a bit mundane, a bit stale. And so this conversation is going to be about 5 tips tied to creativity and e-learning. So let's jump into tip number 1. What is your tip number 1 for boosting creativity in the realm of e-learning and microlearning?
Tip number 1 is go back to the basics, go back to the fundamentals. You made a clear point. You can have the skill, but if you don't have the creativity, I'm a firm believer creativity is a learned skill. That it is a skill. I mean, there is some innate talent to creativity. There are people that are more creative in terms of how they think and how they observe. But I think that can be taught. But if we go back to everything drives, we have to look through the lens of theory. That's what instructional design is about, right? So we always talk about theories and models and all these different components on how you do it. But it seems like a lot of times we're chasing technology and then trying to shove design into technology. Instead of, let's go back to the fundamentals and use those theories as our basis to look through that lens. So if, for instance, there's some that I put on our tips is behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and connectivism, which all tie to e-learning in different ways. But what's the learning objective that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to get somebody to change a behavior? Are you trying to get somebody to think differently? Are you trying to get somebody to perform a task better than they're doing it today? So going back to what those initial base learning objectives are, then find the theory to drive the lens that we can look through to say, now I know how to design this learning because I'm using this as my foundation and my basis for that, for the outcome, learning outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So starting with the core learning objective and applying essentially a theory. Can you give me an example of this? Because I'm trying to conceptualize this a bit more.
Let's just start with behaviorism, right? For those that most of us know, if you've been around this industry long enough, Pavlov's dog. I mean, it's a great example, right? Behaviorism. So you have a dog, and then you ring a bell, and that taught the dog changes behavior. That when you hear the bell, you go eat your food. So that's based on reaction, right? There's a trigger that teaches a behavior that when I do this, I'm supposed to do this other thing. If that's in an example of maybe it's like feedback to your learner, right? So if I do this thing, I expect feedback. Or if you present content in small chunks, like microlearning, then you get a response based on those small chunks and then changes that behavior. Constructivism, it's about how we learn by working through things, or like how we, and I'm doing this at a real high level. I don't want to get into the whole geeky stuff, but we learn by doing. So that's task oriented, right? So if you're trying to teach somebody how to drive a new forklift, they've been a forklift driver for 10 years, and then the company just, threw all those forklifts out in the yard sale, and they bought new forklifts that operate differently. So it's not that you don't understand how to operate a forklift, it's you don't know how to understand the sequence procedures on this particular piece of machinery. Safety is different, operations different, all of that. So there's a different approach to teaching that or training that employee or that learner as it is trying to get somebody to behave differently I don't know, learning how to drive on the opposite side of the road, right? So if you're that kind of thing, right? So yeah, just fundamentally, I would my recommendation or my encouraging is take the time. You don't have to study all that. You'll never learn all the theories. You'll never learn all the models. I mean, unless that's your passion. But understand the major ones, and then just get a good understanding of what they are, what the outcome is for that. And then just pick one and say, okay, this is what I'm doing with my learning outcome. Let's use this theory to drive us through that. And that will open up, and that'll expose you to more and more and more, and then you gain more knowledge, and then you can be a better designer in the long run.
Love the approach. All right, what's tip number 2 or idea number 2?
Idea number 2, I'm a big fan of spaced repetition, and this also... So there was and I can't remember the young lady. She did a spaced repetition, how you can learn all 50 states of the U.S. states in like 30 minutes. So spaced repetition is you give small pieces of information, almost like a quiz, right? What is it? Like a flashcard, right? And then as you learn those, you get immediate feedback. And then the ones you get wrong are repeated in the next set. So like if I do 3 at a time, random, I'll present 3, you try what they are. If you get all 3 wrong, then we'll mix them up and I'll present them again until you get 1 or 2 right. Once you get them right, then I present something new, but then I'll also present the one that you got wrong again in that next set. And then we repeat that, sort of a looping cyclical way of repetition. And as you go through that, that's part of that cognitivism part of learning. Like how do you get things into long-term memory? So again, going back, there's the theory that drives spaced repetition learning. And then if you have a learning outcome that you need somebody to memorize steps or memorize procedures or tasks. An example might be a sales representative at a store, at a retail environment, where they have to return a customer's payment on their credit card. So there's a steps of procedures and tasks and certain keys that you have to press on the point of sale system in that environment, and then there's other tasks. So if you've learned that in a classroom or like your onboarding training, but you've never applied it, and it might only happen once a month or something, that's hard to get into long-term memory unless you practice it daily. It's like any skill, right? If you do it 100 times, it becomes second nature. But if you only do it once, twice a year, I don't have that in my long-term memory. So spaced repetition provides something on demand right there, and that kind of leads into some of our other tips. But you can see how this all connects together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently read the book, what is it, Make It Stick, by Kirkpatrick. Yeah, it talks about that a lot in terms of spaced repetition, but the timing of that repetition, right? You don't want to just repeat something 4 or 5 times after you don't want to go through a microlearning unit 3, 4, 5 times in a row and expect to have it programmed into your brain, right?
No, and that's, hopefully we've gotten past microlearning as a buzzword, because it's been around for a long time. And just marketing snags hold of something, and oh look, there's a new word. Let's market it, and then it gets skewed, and it's not necessarily exactly. I think we're past that. Microlearning is a valuable approach. So it's just how you implement it and design it.
I 100% agree, and I know it's. I don't want it to be thrown into like, what is it? Like the metaverse category, right? Or how AR, VR learning, it's a thing for a few months, every 2 to 3 years. Again, I'm a big fan of microlearning. I was on another one of these podcast calls, and it was kind of brought up that it was more of like a trend, but the thing is, it's a growing trend. I mean, it's here, right? It's a consistent learning strategy that works, and I would even for sure it's a preferred learning method with a lot of audiences. So I mean, no, we've been conditioned to learn this way. I mean, and if you look at the way most people prefer to learn, it's typically through a YouTube video, occasionally TikTok, right? It's at least for personal tasks. So again, I'm a big fan of this. This is why we created the channel based off of this. A lot of our solutions, at least at Ninja Tropic, we tend to break them down into smaller topics and incorporate spaced repetition or microlearning or different facets. So again, I'm very happy you brought that up, because it was difficult for me on the last call to not like turn it into a whole conversation. I was about to pull up Google Trends. I mean, Google Trends is also one of my favorite tools for assessing the viability of an idea, right? You can go to Google Trends and pull up any popular term. And at the very least, you can see what consumers or people in the market are searching for. And what's great about microlearning is it's a consistent trend that, I mean, it's not something that comes in spurts. It's something that people are continuously look for, whether if it's a consumer looking for content or instructional designers looking for ideas on theory. So,
well, I might have an unpopular definition of microlearning. I don't see microlearning as a thing, as a product, or as an object. No more than e-learning is, right? So microlearning is an approach. It's a design approach.
Love it. Yeah. 100% agree. Yeah. And honestly, we can have our own call on this. So I'll reach out to you about that, because very excited about that perspective. But let's jump into tip number 3.
Tip number 3, well, it kind of ties in with associative recognition, and that's the compare and contrast of things to get into that long-term memory. So I'm trying to think of an example real quick off that. You know when you try to think of an example right at the moment and then your brain goes blank, right? So association, right? So I always think of and I'll give in my own personal world, as I'm designing and developing, I am OCD when it comes to naming conventions. My documents, my file names, my image names, my audio, all my tech, all the way down to how I name my hard drives. There's this naming convention thing that I know me well enough to know that if I revisit a project or something 3 months from now, if I don't label things a certain way, I'll forget, or I'll ask myself, what did you do that? How did you do that? What were you thinking when you did that? And I don't have time to go back and rethink how I thought, if that makes sense, right? So associative recognition for me, the way I apply it in my own world, is that if I have an item over here, let's just think of e-learning, right? Assets, right? If I have a document with a storyboard, and in that storyboard, it's broken down by scenes, then all of the assets that go to that scene is going to have the same file name. And it's an alphanumeric string of some kind of, so that way when everything's together in big, development environment, I can look very quickly and associate that audio file matches that image file that matches that video file, because they have the same associative file naming convention, and I know they belong together, right? And you can quickly see, going back to the Sesame Street song, one of these things do not belong together. And that might be a pretty weak example in terms of associative recognition. But if we use another example come to mind while I was talking about that is again, going back to the fundamentals. How do we know how to drive from point A to point B, but we can't tell you the street names of those roads? It's like, I need to go visit so-and-so on the other side of town. I know exactly how to get there. I know what road to go on. I know when to turn left. I know when to turn right. But I can't tell you the names of the streets. So associative recognition is a lot like that, in that we recognize and goes back to my military days, rally points. So the gas station on the right with the green sign, I know I'm supposed to turn right. Or the used car lot that has a lot of trucks out front, I know I'm supposed to turn left. Or when I pass that, I'm supposed to turn right at the next street. So we associate visually, and it goes back to my visual language research, is that street signs are universal in a lot of ways by their shape and their color, and we associate how we navigate by those visual cues. So if we can apply that to e-learning, we can apply that to microlearning, to associative recognition, that you can guide a learner through a path by associative recognition on things that they're familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Love the approach. I know when you started trying to think of an example, the first thing I did was I went to Gemini or ChatGPT and tried to pull up an example in associative recognition for product knowledge. Right? And it's interesting because it has a really cool analogy tied to creating a visual map or mind map connecting product features with corresponding benefits. I can see how that can be effective in terms of training and tying things together for the learner.
Yeah, if we just, my big lesson or my big teaching point is that it doesn't matter what we're trying to learn, it's skill-based. Go back to the fundamentals, go back to the core, what drives this. So if you, making a recipe in the kitchen, right? You can tell really quickly, associative recognition, which is salt, which is pepper, because we've learned that. When did we learn that? So you go like, well, that's pepper because it's this, and that's salt because it looks like that. Well, how did you know that? It's in your long-term memory, but at some point in your life, you learned that. So when did you learn it, and how did you learn it? And then take yourself back. Well, how do I know what a spice looks like? How do I know what the different fruits look like? How do I know what the different vegetables look like? They have different textures, they have different colors, they have different shapes. So that goes back to the visual language, right? Everything starts with a shape and a color, a texture, and then we learn the compare and contrast of those, and then we can separate those out and apply those as we need them as we go forward.
Interesting. And I can see this. I can see you applying your theories and frameworks. I think every learning professional I've spoken to, and I don't. This isn't an exact statistic, but out of all of these calls that I've had, about 75% of them didn't necessarily start off in the education space, right? They didn't study formal training, and they come with different frameworks, right? If you're talking to Rance Green, he's a story guy, right? He speaks in a framework. A very brilliant approach on framing in the context of a story arc. And so I definitely love this approach on your theory. Now, let's jump into tip number 4.
Tip number 4, one of my favorites, Gamified. So everybody loves games, right? Because it Gamified, gamification, game like. When you gamify, and I know a lot of people hate that word, but it drives competition. And it drives people to motivate, because if they didn't get the perfect score, they're motivated to go back and do it again. Just think about the most recent game you've played, right? I came in second place. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. Oh man, I came in fourth place that time. I did worse than I did the time. Oh, I got to do it again. So you're motivated to keep doing it because you want to get better. And whether it's you're competing against yourself, you want to get better. You want to be the best you can at that, whatever you're playing or game or whatever. But then if you do it as a cohort where you've got multiple people playing at the same time, like a team or somebody at a company, and there's a leaderboard, and I know there's controversy over leaderboards. but it drives competition. And then there's the playful banter between competitors. I'm going to get you next time, or I can't wait to do this again with you. So there's a lot of underlying motivation to do gamified things, and we see it all the time. Collecting stars when we order Starbucks, and you get so many stars and you get a free drink. So your competition with yourself, but you don't realize, I mean, it's a marketing thing, right? But you're spending more money. You're buying stars, essentially. You're buying stars to get a free thing, but you don't see it that way. You don't feel it that way. You see it as a game. And then one of my all-time favorite is the Monopoly game that McDonald's plays, where you get the little, I don't know if they still do that, but it used to, when I was a kid, the McDonald thing would come out every year, the Monopoly game. Because you wanted to play Monopoly by eating French fries, right? So there's so many opportunities to do that with microlearning, with eLearning, with all kinds of training. But game design, let's be careful here, because that comes back to what we talked about earlier about creativity. Just adding points and adding levels and adding a leaderboard is not game design, right? There has to be, again, the fundamental core mechanics of how to build a game or a gamified experience. And then, it's Eric, it's one of those areas that in my other company that co-own with, when we talk about creative thinking and design thinking and creative design and creative thinking and game design, we use game design as the vehicle to teach creativity. So there's these multiple disciplines that all have to converge together. So we've got the theories. We have to have something to drive our approach. Right? We have to have some lens to look through. So there's the knowledge and the understanding of various theories on which one works. And then there's game design in general. Just how do you design a game mechanics, and all of the parts that go into game design. Then you have the instructional design. You can't forget that, because that's the whole point, right? What's the learning outcome for a good learning game? And then your approach. Let's say microlearning is your approach. So now you're pulling all this together to build a gamified learning experience through microlearning. So you can see the multiple disciplines that are applied there to make that happen effectively.
And I love that the first tip or topic was having an understanding of the basics. Because a lot of times when I'm talking to clients and they want to gamify an experience, it's let's add a leadership board, or it's only one facet of the game, right? And so I love the approach on understanding like the gamification, like what actually makes it an enticing gaming experience for the user. And so
the same. I mean, same with you. I get a lot of clients that say, "Well, we want to do this, we want to do that." And when they say things like that, it's no disrespect to any one of them, because I know what's driving that. But typically, they've seen an example, or they heard, or they had a conversation with someone that did it, and they want to do it too. And it also kind of gives me, not I want to say a red flag, but also tells me that there's probably not a whole lot of analysis that's been done, the learner context analysis front end, why. The big question, what drove you to this decision? Why do you want a game? And that's when the conversation gets, it may not be the best solution. So let's find the best solution. Let's find the problem first. What is the learning problem? And then we can design a solution to solve that problem. And if a game is the best solution, then we'll go down that path. So we have to back up a little bit,
Yeah, or at least I'm a big fan, and I'm a bit of a people pleaser when it comes to if somebody reaches out and they're looking for interactive video, microlearning, or if they already have a vision in mind for the type of learner experience. Even if they haven't gone through very thorough training needs analysis, right? Um, I'm still, I'm a big fan of of course, doing the basics, the foundations that leads into the actual game that they're building. So I love the approach, understanding what are the true learning objectives, outcomes, and then, of course, maybe I should get better at pushing back, but the idea is making sure that they understand why we're creating or designing the game this way, right? And it makes it a more powerful tool for negotiation if we have to change a feature of the game. One of the cool things we're doing right now is we're building a storyline course that functions with Google Street View. Well, that functions like, which is a series of 360 images stacked on top of each other. And you can interact with the images and click videos. And it was the client's idea, right? But we're just going through the training needs analysis. We're building up the vision for this. But with that being said, now we have the end experience in mind. Now we're going through the training needs analysis, making sure that we're leading to a story structure that ties this to employee onboarding problems. So I'm a big fan of when clients come and when they have a specific topic in mind or a vision or a facet, but and I try not to be too judgy, right? Whether if they like the term microlearning or if they have an approach to it that they have in mind, or even gamification too. I think I've seen a lot of people in the industry who get frustrated because they become a bit cliche, but it's what people are understanding, right? They're terms that people can associate with.
Yeah, it's the low-hanging fruit, really, right? So it does take a courageous manager, a courageous client, whatever, to kind of think outside the cliche of different learning approaches. And then having those conversations, we have a creative design call, right? So let's just brainstorm some ideas. Let's go with, if they come, like to your point, it's their idea. If they come with their idea, well, let's tear that apart and figure out, is there something else we can do with that, or can we expand on that, or is your idea a little overkill, and here's why. And then I always drive back to what is our outcome? What's our learning objective? What problem are we trying to solve? And then we'll work backwards into it. Because if we start with a solution and then we try to shove the objective into a solution, then we're not going to get the quality that we wanted from the get-go.
I know this might sound, I like shoving learning objectives into solutions that our clients are going for. It's one, because if somebody comes to us, they typically have a cool creative idea, right? And there might be a simpler way to do it, but typically if I can find the purpose behind it, right? How do we make this? Whether if they have an idea of a game, yeah. How do we build purpose into your idea? And again, sometimes the idea, in reality, sometimes you can just host a webinar and get 85% there, right? But typically when you have a learning and development team excited about an approach, a methodology, or an idea, and they haven't really gone through the training needs analysis yet, of course, it's going to be our job to make sure that we build purpose into their strategy, right? It's useful, but then also, I think at the end of the day, they typically come empathizing with learner experience a bit more, right? So, I do have my biases, and I have to be aware of that, right? So I think you might pull your comic hammer out a little more often than necessary. I'm gonna
Well,
pull out.
it's just just like a game, right? Using the comic medium as a solution, let's say, as an approach. It is not the answer for it. Doesn't work in a lot of ways. It doesn't work in a lot more ways than it does work. But going back to story structure, if the if the instruction and the learning objective lends itself to a story, then the comic medium lends itself to that story. So that's how we can connect it together. But if I'm doing,
I know we're. What's that?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna jump to tip number 5, but I can let you finish that thought.
Yeah. No, we can. No. I don't know what my finished thought was. Tip 5. On demand. Yeah. So that it all connects together, right? So we go back to, I think it was an example I mentioned earlier about a sales representative having to return, do a return on a credit card for a customer. Forgets how to do that. You can have something right there on demand for them to access 15-second, that's microlearning, right? 15-second, do this task, step 1, 2, 3, bam. So without worrying about bothering somebody else to say, hey, I need your help to come process a return, it's all about customer service, right? You mentioned customer service. So if you give your frontline employees the authority to handle things, you have to give them the tools in order to execute that authority. So if you give a frontline employee the authority to return a credit card, but you don't give them the tools to do it, then they have to stop what they're doing to bother somebody else for assistance. This is where microlearning comes in great little video lessons, little micro kind of things like that. Anything that's on demand, something that I can access in the moment I need it at the time. And we do it all the time now. And I've always struggled with how is it that our world today, our culture today is if I need something, I go to YouTube and I can find it within a few seconds and I'll watch a 3-4 minute video and then I know how to change a leaky toilet. Or if I need a replacement ingredient for a recipe that I don't have and I don't feel like going to the store, what are some alternative ingredients for this item? That's on demand, right? I don't need to put that in my long-term memory right now. I just need to be able to perform in the moment. And on demand, now, aside from technology and aside from AI and all of the things that we have access to, it's the creative design of what that would look like and how you would deliver it, and then how people would access it.
Yeah, and this ties to building your training around business problems too, right? I know not everything might lend itself to that on-demand nature. I mean, for example, in the context of microlearning, right? Like there's maybe if it's general onboarding tied to values, you're more creating a bias amongst your employees that favors certain business practices. But with that being said, I'm always incredibly enthusiastic when there's a legitimate problem or know-how or tactical skill we can tie microlearning to, right? Whether and it's rare that our clients come with that level of granularity, right? Like what's the actual behavior shift you want to see happen, or like when would they actually want to reference this material that's useful for them? And so I actually, onto another point, do you know of an LMS that lets you search content that way? That's very accessible. It's a new, I'm seeing it a lot more often now, but I know when I started, it wasn't as accessible.
Eric, I've been out of the LMS space for probably a decade. I tinker with them and I work with them with the customers, but I don't, I'm not in the space to know the differences between who's got what out there now today. That's a great question.
Yeah, I'm still seeing that challenge in terms of having that on-demand tactical learning ability, right? That just-in-time concept where I know when microlearning initially came out, everyone was excited about its practical use, but there's still some tediousness behind most LMSs where you have to log into a portal where you still might go to YouTube for how to do something, or you still might call somebody.
Well, in my own world, as I mentioned before our call, I just started another business, which is a brick and mortar that I'm going to have frontline employees that I have to hire and train. And I'm already designing a series of microlearning on-demand type courses or modules, or whatever you want to call them, to help them, because there's no way the amount of knowledge that they're going to be, the amount of knowledge that they need that's in my head, there's no way I can get it out of my head into theirs in a short period of time. So I'm designing a series of microlearning. We'll have a training class, obviously, to get up and running, but I don't expect everybody to remember that in the operations of day-to-day operations. So I've got plans to have several iPads around so where they can access real quick. And then I'm not going to use an LMS. I'll use my own server, and then I'm going to use XAPI to track which ones are getting the most hits, let's say. This particular piece of content gets accessed more times than any other. And that's like, okay, so that might be something we need to have a little bit more deeper training on. Or if there's one that nobody ever touches, that's great. Then we can do a quick survey. Does everybody understand this? Oh yeah, that's a piece of cake. Great. Then I'll take it out of the library. Don't need it anymore. So I'm really excited about implementing something. I'm going to be my own client I'm going to be my own client, if that makes sense. I'll be the subject matter expert and the client at the same time. So it's going to be a fun journey.
Oh, I absolutely get it. I know with any of the other side businesses I jump into, I'm noticing I tend to have that biasness towards training, right? Where if I'm going to contribute one thing, either to the customer journey or even to employees going through a process, I'm going to be involved in the training. But Dr. Kevin Thorn, definitely appreciate the time. It's been great. I know
it's been great.
We typically like to. What's that?
I said it's been terrific catching up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically on these podcast calls, we'll include some links, but to your website, information about you. But what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Probably LinkedIn. Probably the best way. Just my name. Just search my name. I don't think there's a wrestler by the same name. If you Google my name in Google, then you'll come up. That's not me.
That's your third job.
So,
is it like WWE wrestling or
yeah.
folk style? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I got excited for folk style.
I think he's over there on the shelf. Let me see. No.
Is that your wrestler mask?
Yeah, he's over there somewhere. I've got an action figure of myself over there, the wrestler, Kevin Thorn.
That's funny. I'm going to assume you guys are the same person. So
okay.
I definitely appreciate the time today. And again, we're going to include any useful links to your site, material to the description of this. So thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Want to learn more about microlearning best practices? We've got you covered. Check out the video cards for more related content. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly tips and explore the description for a curated list of resources to continue your e-learning journey.